pleased. But he saw Colette and Win sitting together and laughing heartily. They may have lost the competition, but they had won the battle, and that was all that mattered to them. The next day, Donin threw a grand party at Gina's tavern to celebrate Will's victory. At the party, both Werkner, Rost, and Colette were also invited. Everyone raised their enormous beer mugs and congratulated Will, while the tavern ladies continuously praised Colette for her excellent performance, making her blush deeply. Werkner was not spared from the enthusiastic cheers of the dwarves, who thanked him for always supporting Will. Donin was the happiest, continually drinking to the bottom of his mug, and then he cheerfully asked if Will had been recruited by the tower. Colette replied that of course not, still feeling upset that not only did they have internal conflicts, but they also failed the competition, all because Theon had caused trouble. Rost inquired about the other person, and it turned out that Will had invited Theon to join, but he had bluntly refused, saying he had no interest in coming to such a trivial place. It was no big deal. Donin was still very pleased, as this victory also meant they would receive a proper apology. Moreover, Julius was crying out loud in the kitchen, having to wash dishes and shouting, "Why? Why do I have to work as a dishwasher in a dwarf's tavern?" Not only Julius, but also his two underlings were serving and carrying dishes. Thankfully, Gina was short on staff, so having these guys help out was a real relief. The three members of Will's group looked at Julius with satisfaction, while Julius continued to curse furiously, still not having been recruited due to his loss to Will. Suddenly, Werkner appeared worried. Colette thought he was just not used to parties, but what he was concerned about was what would happen after Will and his group celebrated at the festival. Colette mentioned that surely people would view Will differently. Werkner didn't think so. If that were the case, it would be great. However, he knew that unexpected things would surely happen, things that even he could not anticipate. Meanwhile, Will continued to be served beer without getting drunk. Time flew by quickly, and before they knew it, the comprehensive practical exam had arrived. The two friends were worried, as the task for this exam was to explore a dungeon for a week. Damn it, going into a dungeon with regular mages was a nightmare. At this point, they just hoped to be in a group with one of the top 3 of their year. Suddenly, they saw Will walking by with Colette, and the two friends immediately called out to him, saying, "Hey, useless, want to join us for the dungeon?" Will and Colette were surprised, and the two friends felt a bit awkward, having no real connection. One of them blushed and tried to act cool, saying, "We acknowledge your incredible strength, so come with us to the dungeon." Before Will could respond, several girls from behind shouted, "We can't let you guys get ahead." Everyone was saying they were waiting for Will to invite him to join their group. With so many people crowding around, Will started to sweat. At that moment, Ignore, Liana, and Theon walked by and immediately took notice of the scene. Colette realized what was happening. After the tournament, people's perceptions of Will had changed. Could this be what Werkner was worried about? Colette rushed over to intervene and shouted, "Hold on. You've been treating Will like a joke all this time, and you're being too presumptuous." Everyone tensed up and stopped. Colette continued, "Look, Will is very upset." Will's face was dark, but it wasn't from anger. It seemed he was more excited. Will's eyes sparkled like a puppy's as he said, "Wow, Colette, are you saying everyone wants me on their team? Is this friendship?" Oh man, this was the expression of someone who had been starved for friends for 1,000 years. A girl stepped forward and said bluntly, "Colette, don't stop us. Haven't you always monopolized Will?" Colette was taken aback, and the girl continued, taking Will's hand and saying that their credit points would be shared, so he should join them. But Colette wouldn't have it. She yanked Will's hand away and announced, "Will has an appointment with me tomorrow. We're going shopping together." That night, Colette couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed as she replayed the afternoon's events. She hadn't expected to lose control like that. Her friend Rose brought 2 cups of hot tea and asked if Colette was going on a date the next day. Colette blushed and tried to deny it, but the whole academy was already buzzing with the news. Rose, knowing it was Colette's first date, wanted to offer some help. She advised Colette to prepare a bit, and Colette agreed. She didn't want to lose control in front of Will again. Rose, amused by her friend's naivety, said that as long as she wore a nice outfit, even a lie would seem true. At the dormitory outside the academy, Rost was reading a book and asked Will if he was going to the dungeon the next day. Will replied that he would be going shopping instead. Will thought Colette's suggestion made sense. She had mentioned needing to get some equipment for the practical exam. Little did he know that Colette was using it as an excuse for a date. Rost had a hunch and asked if the shopping was a 2-person affair with Colette. Sure enough, it was. Rost's mind immediately started racing, as if he had figured something out. The next morning, in the central plaza, Colette was dressed in a pretty dress like a princess, waiting quietly for Will. Her hands were clenched, and her face was flushed. It was clear to her that this was a date. When Will arrived, he greeted Colette with a smile and a good morning. He wore a magnificent gold necklace, and Will patted her head, saying he thought he would be early, but it turned out Colette was even earlier. She blushed and awkwardly explained that she had woken up early by accident. Then, Will's gaze fixed on Colette, prompting her to ask, "What is it?" Will smiled and adjusted his glasses, saying that her hairstyle and outfit suited her very well. This made Will feel a bit shy, and hearing this, Colette nearly swooned. She drooled and turned even redder, her limbs starting to lose control. She covered her mouth and thanked Will. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind them. It was Rost. He greeted Colette and Will with a good morning. The three stood in silence. Colette didn't know Rost, so he quickly introduced himself as Will's roommate and wished them a pleasant day. Colette asked Will what was going on. Will patted his head and explained that since Rost insisted, he agreed. Rost, shamelessly, said that shopping was more fun with a crowd. Rost grabbed Will's hand and pushed him along, saying they needed to hurry because there was a lot to buy. This scene nearly made Colette faint. How could they, two people of the same gender, be holding hands like that? To her shock, Rost turned around and committed an unforgivable act that left Colette in despair on the spot. She yelled, "What's going on? What is this all about?" They then went to the library, where Will and Rost were engrossed in choosing books together. Colette was almost unceremoniously pushed aside. Rost took the initiative to pick out clothes for Will, doing it quickly and professionally, while Colette struggled and failed. The two guys even shared an ice cream, leaving Colette feeling defeated. Will noticed that Colette seemed to have lost her fighting spirit and was sitting there dejectedly, so he asked her what was wrong. Colette turned with a pout and asked loudly, "What is going on with that guy?" Colette, bewildered and dazed, said to Will, "He's always around you. From the start, I noticed something odd about the distance between you two. Is he really just a roommate? His face is also quite cute. Could he actually be a girl instead?" This left Will extremely surprised, and he replied with confusion, "What are you talking about, Colette? Rosti is a guy just like me, definitely. In fact, his is even bigger than mine." Colette's face turned crimson at the thought of the two guys bathing together, and the size of Rosti's. Will continued, saying that although they might have touched each other a bit more than usual, that's just how they have been from the start. Just then, Rosti appeared with drinks and sat between them. Will asked where Rosti's drink was, and Rosti said he didn't need one because he would share Will's. Colette immediately offered her drink and told Will to share it with her. Will, bewildered, didn't know which drink to choose. Rosti then suggested that Will should go prepare his sword. Will felt uneasy, but in the end, Colette also didn't want to join them, saying that having a mage accompany Will to the blacksmith would upset the dwarves. So Will left, leaving the two of them behind. Colette exhaled deeply and decided to ask directly whether Rosti and Will had something beyond friendship. Rosti immediately punched a nearby wall and declared boldly, "It's not just your imagination, Colette. I love Will more than anyone else." Seeing this, Colette couldn't believe her ears and asked again, "What?" Rosti continued to declare, "I love Will more than you do, Colette." This statement made Colette furious, and tears streamed down her face as she shouted, "Let me tell you, Will and I have been inseparable for 4 years. Rosti knew this but was undeterred, saying, "I know, but Colette, have you ever shared a bath with Will? Probably not, right?" The naive girl and Rosti have now officially declared a rivalry over Will. Will walked alone, feeling uneasy as he noticed the tension between the two. Suddenly, someone called his name. Startled, he turned to see Rihanna, one of the top students of the academy. Will immediately felt the disparity between their worlds, one a top-tier genius and the other just a mere incompetent. Will politely asked, "Is there something you need from me?" Rihanna requested that Will accompany her for a moment. Without saying a word, Will felt anxious and followed her. They entered a luxurious mansion where Rihanna gently closed the door behind them. Will was immediately surprised to find Theon glaring at him with an intense look, as well as Julius, Ignore, and Rihanna, all top students. Rihanna then explained that the comprehensive practical combat exam would actually begin in the final year of the next academic term. Therefore, she wanted to form a team of 5 here to tackle the dungeon. Will was stunned by this revelation. As the practical combat course results were announced at the academy, the final level of the tower was about to be opened. The points received had skyrocketed, accompanied by tremendous dangers. With only a short time left until the graduation exams, it was not an exaggeration to say that whether one could ascend the tower or not would depend on the results of this practical combat course. Theon immediately slammed the table and shouted, "What the hell are you doing here, you useless one?" Julius then asked, "Rihanna, what's going on? Are you telling me to freeze him, or something?" Will was terrified. It was clear that these two did not like him at all. He turned to Rihanna with a pleading look, shaking his head repeatedly. Rihanna coolly asked, "Is that not allowed?" Her nonchalant attitude caused Will's blood pressure to drop. He was surprised to discover that Rihanna was so indifferent. Theon was ignored once more and shouted, "Hey, are you ignoring me again?" Ignore suddenly narrowed his eyes, raised his wand, and instantly transformed their surroundings into a field of flowers. Everything came to a halt, and Theon ceased his actions. Ignore then sarcastically asked Theon, since when did a mage dare to act on par with a lowly dwarf? Theon let go of Will, and Will realized that this was a special illusion magic of the elf race. Ignore smiled and said they should first hear Liana's story. Liana explained, as I mentioned earlier, the comprehensive practical combat exam is about to begin. For the most outstanding mages of our year, I want to include him, someone who has shown exceptional ability at the magic tournament. Will blushed suddenly, while Liana continued, he possesses a power that we don't have, and I believe it will be useful in the dungeon. Julius immediately objected, saying, I'm questioning your perspective on life, Liana. Even the search magic used in the dungeon is something he can't utilize, so this guy will just be a hindrance. Are you being fooled by a rare theatrical performance? Theon also chimed in, I'm also declining to team up with him. Will was on the verge of tears, while Ignore crossed his legs and sarcastically declared, the mix of pride and boredom in your comments still sounds like the distant barking of defeated dogs, doesn't it? Can you still look down on someone who has defeated you? I'm skeptical about your character. Theon was incredulous that Ignore would say such things, but Ignore didn't stop. He continued, with extraordinary power equivalent to that of the dwarf race, coupled with sensitivity comparable to that of a monster, and seasoned combat experience with no flaws, your staffs have already lost to his sword. The two of them scowled. Julius mocked, aren't you just getting points by sucking up to Liana, Mr. Elf? Ignore was unfazed by this, even respecting Liana more because of it. If someone like her has assessed him this way, then I will also value promoting the incompetent. Unlike you two, who were furious, Will was sweating profusely. Liana said directly, I will use Ignore just like I use all of you. I want to climb the tower and be the top student of the year. What I seek is evaluation, value, and future, not just what I have now. Will asked, what about after the tournament? She replied that she had received an invitation from the Thunder Saints faction. Will was astonished. Even with such a stable future, Liana was still pushing herself further? Liana closed her eyes and said, because currently, those remaining in the academy are leftovers. Or rather, the incompetent. The two guys fell silent, feeling as though she was referring to them, while Will was surprised that this girl viewed all the remaining students as incompetent. Liana added that she carried the burden of bringing glory to the Owenzos family, a short-lived family. Climbing the witch tower alone would not be enough. She was even aiming for the position of Magia Windy. Everyone remained silent. Liana knew that everyone here shared that grand ambition. She then placed a coin into a cup and said, if you find what I said valuable, put your coin into this cup. Ignore immediately agreed, knowing that no other team had higher combat power than the one sitting here. Julius felt this was like being coerced into gaining more credit. Theon contemplated, while Will held the coin, swallowed nervously, unsure of what to decide. Will returned to his two friends, who had been waiting for him for so long that they went searching for him. But they hadn't found him at the forge either. By then, what decision had Will made? He decided to join Liana's group. With all 5 coins collected, Liana smiled. In class, Professor Werkner was lecturing about the practical combat exam, which would start in 10 days. Levels 7 through 10 would be opened, allowing students to fight stronger monsters to earn more credit points. The total credit points for this practical exam could exceed 1,000 points. Defeating the boss of a level would yield even more credit points. This was an opportunity to make up for any credit shortfall and take a step closer to the tower. Will and his friends were extremely excited after hearing this, but Professor Edward threw cold water on their enthusiasm by saying, of course, there will be deaths. Last year, 4 students were killed by monsters. Although teachers are assigned to support in the dungeon, it cannot completely prevent this situation. The excitement in the air was dampened as Professor Edward continued with a stern tone. Don't be reckless. Put aside any notion of mere bravery without strategy. What you should be pursuing is not admiration for the title of Magia Windy, but a steely resolve to understand your current position. Meanwhile, in the tower, an old man with a blindfold, looking quite impressive, was reporting to Magia Windy Carriot. Carriot said, there's no need to report every little detail, Logwell. Even if you're temporarily in charge, you're not my representative. Logwell replied, lightning is reckless, ice is lazy, and the Holy One is arrogant. The most suitable candidate is Instia Balum. Upon hearing this, Carriot laughed and asked if the Radiant King hadn't returned yet. Logwell reported that he was still on a distant expedition and hadn't come back, leaving Carriot perplexed since the barrier was on the verge of collapsing, and he had yet to appear. This was near the Reg Arden base on the 7th floor. On the first day of the practical combat exam, everyone was amazed by the size of the base. Liana immediately called Colette over and asked, did I invite you to come along? Colette blushed and stammered, if Will is going, then I'm going too. Rosti also said his goodbyes to Will, explaining that as a member of the technical department, he couldn't join them. Professor Edward announced that it was time. The students lined up neatly and listened to him say, the practical combat exam, also known as high-intensity exploration, is different from regular practical combat. You will need to survive in the dungeon for a week. Confirm the bases established on each floor scattered on the map. If you finish the exam or decide to quit, you must evacuate to these bases. Our teachers will be waiting for you there. Werkner looked at Will, having a lot of trust in him. Will thought that he must achieve results here and then head to Elfie's location. The signal was given, and all the students began to rush into the 7th floor. The group jumped down into a massive cave mouth and fell freely. Will and Colette were terrified, their faces pale. Thanks to Ignore's magic, the others landed smoothly, but Will and Colette landed on their backsides. As soon as they touched the ground, monsters attacked them. It appeared to be a centipede, but Will was astonished to see it was actually a massive swarm of crimson ants. Will prepared to draw his sword to clear the way, knowing that if the mages were surrounded on all sides, they would be helpless. However, Ignore said, "There's no need, Will. Don't you know why the Owinzaw's family is called that?" Will was stunned to see Liana charging forward, surrounded by a multitude of chaotic lightning bolts. Her family was known for its knightly lineage. Liana began chanting a spell, summoning the power of thunder. A powerful lightning bolt infused into her body, increasing her speed. Liana plunged into the swarm of giant ants, and the lightning obeyed her commands, striking the ants from all directions and tearing them apart. In an instant, she had eliminated dozens of the ants. Will realized it was an enhancement spell. Ignore confirmed this, adding that she was a rare specialist in close-range magic among contemporary mages. Liana casually turned back and told everyone to move forward quickly, so they wouldn't have to compete with other teams for credit points. Will swallowed nervously, having never seen such dominance in close-range combat before. Meanwhile, in a part of the cave near a deep chasm, fresh blood was dripping. An enigmatic figure in a hooded cloak was muttering angrily, "Damn it! What do you mean, retrieve that thing in secret? Aren't we ruining the students' festival?" Meanwhile, another figure was strangling a man, who immediately decapitated. This figure appeared grotesque, exuding dark energy, and his head seemed to be an ominous mist rather than a human one. Holding the severed head, he said, "At this point,